By 1953, Ho Chi Minh's communist guerrillas had been fighting the French army for 7 years in Vietnam. The French forces were struggling to pin down and destroy the elusive Viet Minh revolutionaries. Now, they hoped that American support and a newly planned stronghold would draw Ho Chi Minh's troops into a final, decisive confrontation in the valley of Dien Bien Phu, the Indochina War. By early 1953, the conflict in Indochina had reached a stalemate. Both the Viet Minh and the French Union had suffered and achieved their share of victories and defeats. Ho Chi Minh and General Von Nguyen Giap's forces had wiped out French border outposts and garrisons in 1950 and ambushed a major French patrol in 1952. But they failed to capture heavily defended French positions protected by artillery and air power. Their costly assaults on Dien in 1951 and Nha San in 1952 resulted in huge losses with no gains. Meanwhile, French Union troops managed to hold the Red River Delta but could not pursue or destroy the Viet Minh on their own terms. To address the deadlock, Paris sent General Henri Navarre to Indochina in May 1953. His orders were to find an honorable way out of the war, but to do so, he needed battlefield victories to gain diplomatic leverage. Navarre knew that his paratroopers and Foreign Legion units were essential for offensive operations, yet they were being drained defending nearly 900 scattered garrisons across Indochina. He therefore decided to abandon several remote positions, including Nha San, and consolidate his forces in the Red River Delta in preparation for a future offensive. In central and southern Vietnam, commando-style raids would eliminate isolated Viet Minh bands, while elsewhere, Navarre focused on training local Vietnamese troops. Once they could take over garrison duties, French forces would be freed from mobile operations. Navarre also sought increased U.S. assistance. In Washington, former World War II commander Dwight D. Eisenhower was now president, deeply concerned about the spread of communism in Europe and wary of similar expansion in Asia. In July 1953, the Korean War ended in stalemate and division. The war had shown that international forces could contain communism, but at a tremendous cost and without a clear victory. The experience also changed U.S. perceptions of Ho Chi Minh. Under President Truman, the U.S. had once sympathized with Vietnamese independence movements opposing French colonial rule. An American OSS team had even trained and armed Ho Chi Minh and Von Nguyen Giap in August 1945 to fight Japanese occupiers in Indochina. But under Eisenhower, Washington now viewed the Viet Minh as agents of global Soviet communism. The U.S. agreed to fund Navarre's strategy with $400 million in aid, on the condition that France abandon negotiations with Ho Chi Minh and accept West German rearmament in Europe. Soon after, Viet Minh activity expanded into Laos, forcing a French reaction. Such a move threatened to stretch the war beyond the reach of French mobile forces based in the Red River Delta. Navarre decided to block the Viet Minh supply lines into Laos by capturing the strategically important village of Dien Bien Phu through an airborne assault. On November 20th, 1953, 6 French parachute battalions dropped into the valley. They met light but unexpected resistance. Major Big-Eared of the 6th Colonial Parachute Battalion recalled, "When we came down on November 20th, we were told there would be no Vietnamese. But there were 2 companies exactly where we jumped. Some of my men were killed before they even touched the ground. Others were stabbed where they landed." Tucker Jones, 79. After securing the area, the French parachuted in bulldozers and construction gear to establish a new airbase. Dien Bien Phu was to serve as a launch point for patrols and raids deep into Viet Minh territory. Like Nha San, it would rely entirely on air supply through its 2 valley airstrips. By early 1954, French forces had turned Dien Bien Phu into a fortified complex of 9 defensive strongpoints, arranged in inner and outer rings. Most were located on the valley floor near the airstrips, with a few on the surrounding hills. Troops, artillery, 10 M24 Chaffee tanks, and 9 Bearcat fighter bombers were flown in. The tanks were delivered in parts and reassembled on site. Vietnamese and Algerian women were brought in to work at the camp's brothel. By January, around 2,800 men, many of them colonial or Vietnamese, had been flown into the base. Colonel Charles Pyrath, the camp's artillery commander, was confident. "No Viet Minh gun will fire 3 rounds without being destroyed." Tucker Jones, Yet Dien Bien Phu had serious weaknesses, quickly recognized by the Viet Minh. It was 275 kilometers from Hanoi, farther than Nha San, making resupply slower and ground reinforcement impossible. Its defenses, designed for offensive operations, were incomplete and scattered, with wide gaps between strong points. The artillery was poorly shielded and limited to about 60 guns, insufficient for such a large base. Worst of all, the airstrip and much of the camp were overlooked by forested hills. Although the French were aware of these vulnerabilities, they dismissed them as minor. Aircraft and a few helicopters could provide support, and the hills were considered impassable for heavy weapons. The Viet Minh, they believed, lacked artillery and anti-aircraft expertise. The French assumed that isolated strongpoints would draw in the Viet Minh, allowing them to destroy their attackers as at Nha San. However, General von Nguyen Giap soon moved 50,000 regular troops, 1/3 of his army, into the region. With the Korean War over, the Viet Minh also benefited from increased Chinese aid. Troops received training in artillery, engineering, and heavy weapons, and were equipped with larger caliber guns, including American pieces captured in Korea, as well as improved anti-aircraft systems. China's Central Military Committee instructed its advisors, "To eliminate the enemy totally and to win the final victory in the campaign, you should use overwhelming artillery fire. Do not save artillery shells. We will supply and deliver sufficient shells to you." Chen. 104 French aircraft bombed Viet Minh columns along known roads and trails. But Vietnamese laborers carved out hidden jungle paths, eventually spanning over 500 kilometers. By January, the Viet Minh had deployed about 240 artillery pieces, heavy mortars, and recoilless rifles around Dien Bien Phu. Flak guns have been maneuvered into the hills encircling Dien Bien Phu. Such a vast buildup of men and equipment is a daring gamble for General Giap, leaving other sectors exposed and risking the loss of valuable heavy weapons. Yet, with negotiations expected in April, he understands that whoever triumphs at Dien Bien Phu will hold the upper hand at the bargaining table. On January 31, 1954, Giap's artillery opens fire, continuing sporadically for 6 weeks. Vietnamese gunners are carefully calibrating their ranges and studying French counter-battery responses. By March, the valley has been blasted into a barren moonscape, and the French brace for the inevitable onslaught. War correspondent André Lebon captured a conversation between 2 soldiers. "It's going to be like Nha San, only 10 times bigger. Or almost Verdun. This time they'll put all their big guns here and show us what they've learned about real warfare." Fall. 136. The battle on March 11th. The Viet Minh launched their first probing attacks on the northern bastions of Gabrielle, Anne-Marie, and Beatrice. Beatrice, perched on an isolated hilltop, is especially vulnerable. These assaults reveal far greater tactical sophistication than those at Nha San. Before each attack, Viet Minh artillery pounds French positions with devastating precision, collapsing bunkers and silencing batteries. A legionnaire at Beatrice recalled, "We were all shocked, asking ourselves how the Viets had managed to bring in so many guns capable of such intense fire. Shells rained down on us like a hailstorm in autumn. Bunker after bunker, trench after trench, crumbled, burying men and weapons beneath them." Fall. 137. Diversionary attacks prevent French reinforcements from reaching Beatrice, and by March 14th the position is overrun, with 75% casualties. Giap's next target is Gabrielle, and despite a desperate armored counterattack, it too falls. French counter-battery fire proves largely ineffective and burns through a quarter of their ammunition supply on the first day alone. As supply planes attempt to land, they are met by a curtain of anti-aircraft fire from the surrounding hills, while artillery shells pound the runway. Explosions destroy C-47 transport aircraft on the ground and cripple all but 2 Bearcat fighter bombers. On March 15th, with most French artillery destroyed or silenced, Colonel Pyrath, overwhelmed by failure, apologizes to his officers before taking his own life with a grenade. To many within the camp, the battle already seems lost. Yet the surviving French troops continue to fight on as reinforcements parachute in under heavy fire. Between mid-March and early May, about 4,300 men, many without parachute training, drop into the inferno of Dien Bien Phu. In early April, a French paratrooper described his harrowing descent. "I jumped with the first wave close to midnight. As soon as my chute opened, I found myself amid an incredible spectacle. Anti-aircraft tracers, flares, explosions. It was like a Bastille Day fireworks show. French nurses often accompany returning aircraft to care for the wounded. One, Geneviève de Gala, remains at the base for the duration of the siege, tending to the injured and earning the Légion d'honneur for her courage. The exhausted defenders reinforce the shrinking perimeter as French commanders debate 3 possible courses of action. Operation Condor would send a relief column to break through to Dien Bien Phu. Operation Albatross proposed a breakout by the garrison toward friendly lines. And Operation Vulture, the most desperate option, would seek direct U.S. military intervention. The French command decides to move forward with both Operation Condor and Operation Vulture, while keeping Albatross as a last resort option. However, organizing the necessary transport and troops for Condor proves almost impossible, and many officers doubt its feasibility. As a result, General Navarre shifts his focus to Vulture. He appeals to the United States for the loan of heavy B-29 bombers capable of obliterating Viet Minh artillery and anti-aircraft positions. Officially, these bombers would be flown by French crews, though given the training requirements, this seems unlikely. The Americans understand that France's request effectively amounts to direct U.S. military intervention. The proposal finds some support in Washington. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and Vice President Richard Nixon advocate armed intervention, possibly even the use of atomic weapons. But others are far less enthusiastic. By 1954, the United States is already covering nearly 80% of France's military expenses in Indochina. General Matthew Ridgway, the former commander in Korea, warns that deeper involvement would drain resources and risk provoking Chinese entry into the war. He is joined by House Minority Leader Lyndon B. Johnson, who insists that any intervention should occur only through an international coalition that includes Britain and other democratic Asian nations. President Eisenhower writes to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, urging joint action. "If I may refer again to our failure to halt Hirohito, Mussolini, and Hitler by not acting in unity and in time. That marked the beginning of many years of stark tragedy and desperate peril. May it not be that our nations have learned something from that lesson?" Fall 303. The letter receives a cool response in Britain, where public opinion favors a negotiated peace with the Viet Minh. Without British participation, there will be no international coalition and, consequently, no official U.S. intervention. Still, 37 American pilots fly 682 resupply missions to Dien Bien Phu under the cover of Civil Air Transport, a CIA-run airline. Some historians believe Eisenhower anticipated the rejection of his proposal, but sought a diplomatic way to avoid intervention while appearing supportive of France. He later reflected, if the United States were, unilaterally, to permit its forces to be drawn into conflict in Indochina and in a succession of Asian wars, the end result would be to drain our resources and weaken our overall defensive position. The 124. By late March, the exhausted French garrison at Dien Bien Phu stands on the brink of defeat. The Viet Minh have seized much of the northern perimeter and rendered the airfield nearly useless. The Battle of the Five Hills with American assistance no longer forthcoming. The French attempt to organize a relief column in Laos, though bad weather and Viet Minh attacks make the effort nearly impossible. Air support proves equally ineffective. With Dien Bien Phu's own aircraft destroyed, French forces must rely on planes flying in from the Red River Delta, but intense anti-aircraft fire keeps most at a distance, preventing effective strikes. As their napalm reserves dwindle, the French begin deploying lazy dog cluster munitions, canisters filled with 11,200 small finned flechettes designed to pierce jungle canopy and inflict heavy casualties over wide areas. Despite these desperate measures, the Viet Minh press on. On March 30th, they launch coordinated assaults against bastions Dominique 1 and 2 and Elaine 1, 2, and 4 in what becomes known as the Battle of the Five Hills. The French employ quad-mounted 50-caliber machine guns in a ground roll with some success, but lose parts of Dominique and Elaine after fierce fighting. Counterattacks briefly retake ground but ultimately deplete their remaining strength. As Legionnaire and paratrooper casualties mount, the burden of defense increasingly falls to French allied Vietnamese, Algerian, and Moroccan auxiliaries. While the fighting rages in the east, Giap's forces strike west of the headquarters, targeting the François and Huguet positions. Viet Minh losses are severe, and Giap later admits that the combat has pushed his troops to the breaking point. The defining feature of this phase was the violence of the battle. As it dragged on, many soldiers, fighting continuously, grew exhausted, tense, and faced immense strain. Our forces suffered heavy losses, forcing rapid reorganization and reinforcement. Fall 278. To prevent morale from collapsing, Giap shifts tactics. Abandoning costly frontal assaults, he turns to a methodical siege strategy to crush the entrenched French stronghold. Chinese engineers soon arrive to assist in the next phase of the campaign. Viet Minh forces dig networks of sapping tunnels, assault trenches, and other siege works to inch closer to the French positions. By mid-April, the French holdout has shrunk to an area barely 1.5 kilometers across, and supplies are dwindling fast. Transport aircraft attempt to airdrop provisions, but many crates land in Viet Minh territory instead. Making matters worse, from April 22nd onward, relentless ambushes and torrential monsoon rains slow the relief effort to a crawl. By early May, the French garrison endures a storm of artillery fire, trapped in flooded trenches. Captain Fourreau remembers. On the afternoon of May 6th, Major Brechignac asked me to move with a radio operator toward the center of the fighting to find a less shattered area where we could regroup the remnants of the battalion. I waded through mud up to my chest as shells fell without pause. At a bend in the trench, I lost sight of the radio man. He must have been killed and buried by the mud. That's when I knew the end had come. In the final attacks, a new Chinese weapon appears on the battlefield, 6-barreled rocket launchers reminiscent of the German Nebelwerfer from World War II. The Viet Minh unleash them in the last barrages against the French headquarters, which comes under direct assault on May 7th. By 6 p.m., the main camp has fallen. Only the isolated outpost of Isabelle still resists. Under full-scale attack, the defense is doomed. One survivor calls it hell in a very small place. The French attempt to break out to the south in scattered groups, but most are killed or captured. Only 78 men managed to escape from Dien Bien Phu. On May 8th, as France marks the 9th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, the fall of Dien Bien Phu is confirmed with a single code word: Austerlitz. Aftermath. The defeat at Dien Bien Phu is catastrophic for French colonial power. Around 2,300 French soldiers are killed, 6,400 wounded, and 9,000 taken prisoner. Viet Minh losses might reach 30,000, yet Ho Chi Minh secures a decisive political triumph on the eve of peace negotiations. Despite thousands of Allied and French troops remaining in Indochina, the battle destroys France's will to continue the war. Public opinion at home had already turned. A 1953 survey revealed that only 23% of French citizens still cared about what many now called la sale guerre, the dirty war. The First Indochina War cost nearly 79,000 French Union lives, including 15,000 North Africans, while up to 200,000 Viet Minh may have perished. At the Geneva Accords in July 1954, the U.S., Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China reach a settlement Laos and Cambodia gain independence, and Vietnam is split along the 17th parallel into a communist north led by Ho Chi Minh and a non-communist south under Emperor Bao Dai and Prime Minister Ngo Dinh. In exchange, the Viet Minh agree to withdraw northward, awaiting national elections in 1956. The new Republic of Vietnam soon expels French officials and soldiers, turning instead to American backing. For Ho Chi Minh, the outcome is bitter. His movement had fought for a unified Vietnam, but Chinese pressure forces compromise. Beijing's priority is securing its southern border and preventing direct U.S. intervention, not empowering a strong, independent Vietnamese communist state with its own nationalist ambitions. Given centuries of rivalry between the two nations, a powerful Vietnam could even threaten Chinese interests. Thus, China begins a peace offensive, aiming to consolidate its new international standing and strengthen its strategic gains. For Viet Minh Commander Le Duan, the agreement is heartbreaking. I traveled by wagon to the south. Along the way, people came out to greet me, thinking we had won a victory. It was so painful. In Washington, the rise of a communist North alarms policymakers. President Eisenhower warns that other Asian nations might fall to communism like a row of dominoes. Determined to protect South Vietnam and free from France's colonial shadow, the U.S. prepares to assume a greater role. By 1954, Indochina's long struggle, particularly Vietnam's, is far from over. And neither is the Cold War. Just 1 year after Stalin's death, the nuclear arms race continues. The Soviet Union pursues its dream of atomic-powered communism, rapidly building nuclear reactors across the nation. If you'd like to learn more about the Soviet nuclear project, from its wartime beginnings to the Chernobyl disaster and beyond, you can watch our Red Atoms documentary series, available exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a creator-owned streaming platform where we can share in-depth stories without algorithmic limits or ad restrictions, and where viewers directly support us. Visit nebula.tvg Real-Time History for 40% off an annual subscription, just $30 a year, to access Red Atoms and our other original series. You can also check out Tip of the Spear by Mustard about the B-2 stealth bomber, and of course, enjoy all our videos ad-free and early on Nebula. That's nebula.tv Real-Time History for 40% off and direct support. We hope you enjoyed this look at the most famous battle of the First Indochina War. It's part of our ongoing series. Watch our previous episode to explore the origins and earlier battles. In the next episode, we'll move into the U.S.-Vietnam War. Stay tuned for more. All sources are linked in the description below. If you're watching on Nebula or Patreon, thank you for making this possible. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is Real-Time History, the only history channel that always flies civil air transport.